I love that beat every time. For some reason, it gets to me. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you here. Monday, November 2nd, 2020, the day before the election. The Americans are hosting down south. So pretty exciting times in the market, pretty exciting times in life these days. I'd say there's a whole bunch of stuff that keeps us. I'm Rob Tetrault from robtetrault.com, portfolio manager here at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. And I am jacked and excited to be here. I join you live from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, Portage in Maine, the windiest intersection on the planet. Great to be here today. Great to have you guys here today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Today's a fantastic show. I'm pretty excited about this. I'm a long-time believer in philanthropy and how important it is for individuals to give whatever you can. If you're blessed and you're able to give money, great, give money. If you're not able to, but you're able to give time, give time. I've always kind of pounded the table on that. My parents, my grandparents always taught me that is a critical component of everyone's being in everyone's life. And it's a motivating factor for us to continue to do well. So I'm excited because today on the show, I'll bring her in right away. Kris Putnam-Walkerly, thanks so much for being here today, Kris. Welcome to the Tetrault Show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
All right. So Kris is an expert. She's an award-winning author. She's a published author. She's got a business, basically a consulting firm, and she deals exclusively with philanthropy and the decision-making that goes into philanthropy and, how families decide where they want to donate. How do they make the decisions as to what they're going to impact and the best way to have a positive impact, the best way to meet those goals. It's really, really neat that you've devoted, I guess, a good portion of your life to this, Kris. And I and the viewers are excited to hear about that today.
Awesome. I'm excited to talk about it.
So where are you right now?
I'm in Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Somewhere in between New York and Chicago.
Yes. The battleground state, or one of the many battleground states that we're gonna find out tomorrow what color you guys went. How's COVID where you guys are at these days?
It's getting worse. I mean, it's spiking all over the United States right now. But in terms of like reality, my kids are in schools. I have 10-year-old twins, so that's helpful. And we're able to go to restaurants, grocery stores, things of that nature. But, to be honest, I'm sort of mentally and physically preparing for the next lockdown when it might happen.
Yeah, Winnipeg is climbing the list of highest test positivity rates probably on the planet. We're up to 10% positivity rates. We've had huge spikes in cases over the last couple of weeks, and we're on code red now. And I think there's a thought or a sentiment around the city right now that we're going to be on lockdown probably later this week. So we're dealing with that. My kids' school is closed. There's almost no one in the office these days, but we're still getting work done. And you're right. I do think the winter is going to be a long winter. We have snow on the ground here.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. So we had like minus a ton over the last couple of weeks. That is Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So, I mean, it's not as it's cold, but it's not like minus 10, like you're minus 10. Let's talk about your background. So you're a philanthropy advisor. So tell me a bit about your journey and how you got here where you are today.
Yeah, so, my interest was always in the nonprofit sector and really kind of the helping professions, if you will. And I went to work, I got my master's degree in social work in California and went to work at Stanford University. And I was evaluating youth and gang violence prevention programs all over the state of California. And it was funded by a large foundation, the California Wellness Foundation, which, was trying to, at the time, was kind of early in framing youth violence as less of a criminal justice problem and more of a public health preventable situation. And, I realized, they were funding programs in like low-income communities to help young people get out of gangs. They were funding research and trying to change policy, educate, increase awareness around violence prevention. And I recognized that, as a funder, if you have nothing else, you have money, right? You have extra money to give away. And if you're smart about it, if you bring in the right experts and talk to people and really understand what the best practice is and really think about what's the right intervention and how can we make a difference, then you really can create a lot of social change. And so I thought, well, my next, job should be in philanthropy. And it was. So then I went to work at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, which at the time was the largest in the US, probably among the largest in the world. This was before the Gates Foundation was created.
This is Packard from Hewlett and Packard?
Yeah, so this is the family foundation of
Silicon Valley, right?
HP. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
And so that was a great experience, and I learned a lot. And then I began consulting. And one of my first clients was Charles Schwab's Family Foundation, and worked with them for many years and just continued to expand my business beyond the Bay Area and nationally and now internationally. And it's been about 20 years that I've been advising philanthropists.
So then you moved back. Is Cleveland home to you, or did you just?
Ohio was home. Yeah, Ohio was home. So I was in California for about 16 years. And then I decided, I don't know that I can spend the rest of my life in the Bay Area as much as I love it. And I came back, ended up attending my high school reunion, my 20-year high school reunion, and re-met a man that I went to high school with, who is now my husband.
Come on.
And he was living in Cleveland. So it was like the universe conspired in my favor.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I had my 20th grad reunion last summer, and it was the same people that I see from time to time regularly around Manitoba. So it was really neat. But we had a mini golf tournament, and it was fun. So you met your husband there. You moved. You decided to start a family, I would imagine, or you already had a family, but you decided to set yourself up in Cleveland, in Ohio, and you devoted kind of your life and your time and your work now to philanthropy and aiding people. So you founded the Putnam Consulting Group at that point, or
no, that was at the beginning after I left Packard. So that was over 20 years ago.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And then I know you wrote a book, and you actually sent me a copy of the book. Really neat book, by the way. Delusional Altruism. When did you write that one, roughly?
I wrote it last year. I just published a week into lockdown in March of this year.
Wow. That's so basically it talks about how people who give, they don't necessarily, it's not easy for them to necessarily meet their objectives. And that's probably what a big part of what you do for the ultra affluent, I would say. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. After advising donors and foundations and corporate giving programs for 20 years, I came to realize that, for the most part, everybody wants to make a difference, wants to change the world, wants to have an impact, is passionate about whatever they care about, but they are getting in their own way, and they're preventing themselves from having that impact that they seek. And they often don't realize this is happening. And so I wrote the book to really help donors recognize the ways in which they kind of cling on to these misguided beliefs and these delusional, as I say, ideas that don't actually make sense. And what they can do differently to have a more transformational impact on whatever cause they care about.
So what are some of the ways that they get in their own way? What's the stuff you see? Yeah.
Well, a big one is a scarcity mindset. And this is interesting because you think people of wealth, and you don't have to have $1 billion to be a philanthropist. You can have $10,000 that you're giving away. But regardless, I think despite having access to enough wealth to donate, donors have a scarcity mindset, meaning that they either they care about the cause, but they're not going to invest in what it really takes to run a nonprofit effectively. For example, there's a lot of myth around overhead being bad, and you want, 99 cents of your dollar to go to the cause and only 1% to overhead, or, administrative fees are bad. And the reality is, what it takes to run a nonprofit effectively is pretty much the same as what it takes to run a business effectively. You need top talent. You need to retain them. You need to train them. You need to develop their leadership. You want good financial management systems. You want a robust fundraising apparatus so that they can raise the funds that they need. You want them to have a strategic plan, a good board, all of these things, right? And as business leaders, often we get that running a business. We understand we need to invest in our research and development and our talent and whatnot. But then when it comes to the nonprofit sector, we kind of toss all those smarts out the window, and we expect these organizations to get along on a shoestring and not pay people well, or expect it to be done by volunteers entirely, or just not make those kinds of investments. And it to me, it's misguided, because whatever cause you care about, early childhood education, mental health, the climate, whatever it is. If you have an organization and a leader that you really believe in, that you think is doing a good job, well, why wouldn't you invest in them and really help them to be as successful as they can be? Because the return on that investment is going to be a lot greater than if you kind of tightly restrict the funding that you give.
Are you talking now specifically about family foundations and people who, and like their approach to their own staff at their family foundations? Or are you thinking, someone who wants to give $100,000 or $1 million to a third party organization and will say, we'll poo-poo it because the admin fees are too high?
Well, it's both, actually. So if the scarcity mindset applies in how families and donors are funding the nonprofits they're supporting, and it also applies to them and the lack of investment they have in themselves as philanthropists. And I really believe that to have the greatest impact you want to have as a donor, you need to become the best philanthropist you can be. And by that, I mean kind of taking on the opposite of a scarcity mindset is an abundance mindset. And that's really thinking about investing in yourself, like in your own learning, in taking the time to build trusting relationships with the nonprofit partners that you support, and really in your own technology and infrastructure as a foundation, perhaps, or even if you're a donor advised fund or just an individual or a couple, taking the time to really think about what's the cause we care about, creating a giving plan. You don't need to invest a lot of money, but you often need to invest time and your own learning and your own professional development, meeting other donors in your community so you can understand community needs and perhaps leverage your funding with theirs to have a greater impact. But too often, donors, families feel guilty. They have wealth. Maybe they didn't expect to have this much wealth in their lifetime, but suddenly they sold a business and there it was, or they inherited wealth and they feel guilty that they, didn't have to do anything for that money. And people are suddenly looking at them differently. And so it's easy to kind of get into the scarcity mindset of like, well, investing in me is bad because I'm already wealthy. And so I'll just kind of give it all away. And it seems like that is noble, but I think it's really delusional.
Huh. When I was reading about the scarcity factor and what you wrote, for me, it really struck a chord, Kris, because I founded the Canadian CMB Foundation, which is an endowment fund and a charity that's dedicated to eradicating the #1 cause of infant disability. So I founded this charity 7 years ago, and I've been doing it on a shoestring budget because of this whole scarcity factor. And we can't invest because I think of how hard it was for me to raise those dollars and how hard it was for me to ask, for a good friend of mine or a colleague for, a $5,000 donation or whatever it may be. So like, we are not spending money on that. We're going to ask for favors. We're going to do this. I'm going to stay and I'm going to do the work on the weekends. But what I realized over time, and this really struck a chord with what I was reading in your book, is that we would have been way better off, Rob, had I just, invested a little bit in the charity. You pay someone to do something right, and you follow up with that, and you invest, and then you leverage that time, and you spread your marketing budget further, and you reach more people, you get more donors, and it's a wheel that keeps moving. So about a year ago for us, we hired an executive director for the first time, a full-time employee. And I remember at the time I was like, this is crazy. I can't do this. The charity's going to suffer. It's going to be, it was the best thing we ever did, because now, the executive director is now finding new sources of funding, and the charity really, really took off. So as hard as it was for me in the scarcity factor, I know it's not quite the same, because, I'm not the only donor to this charity, and it's not a family.
No, it's exactly the same. I think it's exactly the same, because you feel bad. And so you want to kind of hobble along. And it is great to get volunteers and donations and people to do pro bono work. I'm not against that at all, but absolutely investing in talent, because that's their full-time job. You already have a full-time job. You can't do this on the side, really. And, hiring like a grant writer, getting a communications plan, can do wonders for any kind of cause or nonprofit or family foundation, for that matter.
Yeah, we splurged on a grant, and grants like analysis software. I think is like $800 a year, whatever, where they review all the grants that are kind of nationally and which ones we could apply for. And, they help you write letters and stuff. And I remember thinking like, that's crazy. Like, that's a lot of money. But I mean, in my own business that I run here, the Tetrault Wealth Advisory Group, if I had a tool for $800 that would save, countless hours for staff or for why
You
would
wouldn't
we
even think about it.
obviously as a business decision, it's a no-brainer. And yet for some reason we just feel, I guess tiny differently. And I liked how you described it in your book, and I like how you described it today. And I think it's a big factor. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the other things that you see? So you talked about the scarcity factor. What are some of the other things that you see of people kind of wanting to make a difference?
Of things that are getting in their way, or what they're doing?
Things that are getting in their way. Sorry.
Things that are getting in their way. And you know what, Rob, I just noticed, I'm so sorry, my computer battery is running low.
No worries. Do what you got to do. Get it set up. If you take yourself offline or whatever, do you need to go to get a charger? I'll take you out and I'll bring you back in when you're ready. Okay.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
No worries. I'll take you out and I'll bring you back in. So she's going to get her charger fixed up and she'll be right back. But that story that I keep thinking of charity work. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a big believer in, so my son was born with a congenital birth defect, and my wife and I decided we'd start a charity to kind of raise money and raise awareness and change the protocol for newborn babies. It's called CMV. It's the #1 cause of infant disability, cytomegalovirus. It's a congenital birth defect. And we decided we'd make a difference. So we started, we raised that first year, we raised like, I don't know, $5,000 or something. And, then we raised like 15 and 30, and now we're raising $100,000 a year. And now that we're national, we got parental advisory groups. There's a whole bunch of different factors that are setting in. It's time that we spend money to grow the charity, which was a big leap for me, but ended up being great. On the topic of charitable giving and philanthropy. So Kris is going to talk about it a little bit further as well, but I think I've always believed, and I kind of mentioned it in the introduction, that when you're creating a plan to give, for me, what I like to do with my clients is I tell my clients, how much do you want to give? How much are you willing to give this year? How much do you want to give next year? How much do you want to give over the next 5 years? And Kris specifically told me that she is not the expert on the tax side. She's not going to be the one who's going to tell us kind of tax-wise the optimal way to do it. And that's something that I love doing. So that's something that we love doing. Okay, so let's say you want to give $50,000 and you want to give $50,000 a year in perpetuity. Using a 5% discount rate, you need to have $1 million in your family foundation or in your foundation to make sure that that $50,000 will be given in perpetuity. So a neat way to do that, for those of you that are watching out there and wondering about charitable donations in Canada anyways, is you would give the full $1 million in a year that you had very high income. You get the full deduction today, and then you can optimize and you can offset that today, so you get the entire benefit, and then you can kind of give the gifts in perpetuity over the next 5, 10, 20 years, but actually in perpetuity. So these endowment funds and these kind of long-term visions for charitable donations is something that I think is critical. And if you are in a position where you're donating this money, Kris, you can give me a thumbs up if you want me to bring you back in. Not quite yet. Okay. But if you're in a position where you do want to donate and maybe you're giving $50,000 a year and you want to give it in perpetuity, planning is critical around that. And I think it's very important that family out there who's thinking of making kind of these long-term donations or these large significant donations, one, they go through something with Kris on the kind of emotional planning side. But two, talk to your advisor. By all means, please make sure you've talked to your tax advisor, your wealth advisor, and just make sure that you're getting the proper advice around that. I'll just give Kris a chance here to get her camera set up. Some of the stuff that we do is we will actually work with donor advised funds. So a third-party donor advised fund might be something that you would work with. So you would set up where, it's a smaller amount. Maybe you want to give $50,000 or $25,000 or $10,000 to a fund, which will then donate in perpetuity. So that's typically how the donor advised fund works. So this is not setting up your own family foundation. This would be setting up a third-party fund where we would manage the money with a third party. The third party does the administrative work for the donor advised fund. And then we quite simply give the donations every year to the charity of your choice. So these start at a really small number. You could do these donor advised funds at, I think they start at 10 grand or 25 grand. You could do a really small amount. And basically, it's like having your own mini family foundation. So I was just telling our viewers, Kris, that this is not the kind of the specific nuts and bolts that you do, but that's the kind of stuff that we do. So if ever you wanted to chat about that, go to speaktorob.com, www.speaktorob.com. We'd be happy to book a no obligation consultation. Before I get back to you, Kris, I should remind our viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you're watching on, please take a sec to subscribe, to like our videos. Send us your comments. Kris, are you struggling with the camera? Is everything okay?
I'm sorry. Good.
Is it working? I don't.
I couldn't see. I can't see you, but you can see me, I guess. So that's good.
I can see you. Yeah, that's plenty good. Okay. I look the same. There's nothing special to look at over here. I think you were talking about decisions that families make. I don't remember what you were talking about, but maybe I'll just ask you another question. So you've identified a high net worth family. They've identified you. Let's call it that. What are some of the steps that you would take to try to get them to figure out what they want to do? And then how do you work to get them down the right path to achieve their goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, every family is different, obviously. And so it's really a matter of starting with them. And I really start with a few different questions. And I write about this in the book. I actually have a whole chapter called Start with the Right Questions. And there's 12 of them. And a couple of them I think are really important. And the first one is why. Why as a donor do you exist? Like, why does your family have a philanthropy? What is your purpose? Why do you want to give, really? And help the families kind of come to clarity as to what their purpose of their philanthropy is going to be. And then I ask a lot of questions, a lot of what questions. So what do you want to accomplish with your giving? What kind of impact do you want to have in your community? What causes do you care about? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? And, really, what do you want to accomplish even in the next 12 months? Because I think as this global pandemic has shown us, there is, it's pretty futile to try to plan for 5 years or 10 years down the road, right? Because the world keeps changing. And so helping funders to think about what's the next year going to look like. And then when you have a plan for the next year, where are we today as a family foundation? Like, we have no foundation. We're nowhere. We haven't started this yet. Or, we have something in place and we're trying to move from where we are today to where we want to be. Well, then what are the, 2, 3, 4, 5 most important things you need to focus on to get you from where you are today to where you want to be, even in 12 months. And then I help them think about what's the best way to accomplish that. And that could be, in a variety of different ways. It could be that they have a family, they don't have any giving vehicle. They don't have a donor advised fund. They don't have a family foundation. They've been writing checks, which is fine. But, given what they're trying to accomplish, what might be the right giving vehicle to use? And then what are some of the right strategies? And, we can get into other questions too, like, how do we involve our adult children who live in other parts of the country, other parts of the world?
Yeah, here's a free tip for you if you're a Canadian out there and you typically don't have a family foundation or you don't have a donor advised third party fund. You probably have a non-registered account and you probably have investments in there. You should be developing a strategy. If you're actually just cutting checks, the institution you're cutting a check to probably is able to accept securities in kind. And if they are able to accept securities in kind in Canada, if you donate a security that has the highest capital gain percentage in your portfolio, or even better, you buy an asset class that has a depreciating net asset value, you could effectively donate to a Canadian charity for 25 cents on the dollar if it's done properly. And that's the kind of stuff that we love to see and we love to help our clients out. Just a quick tip there. So when you're advising on the kind of this type of level, do you generally lead people down the path of setting up a family foundation if they don't have one?
Not necessarily. I think to create a foundation at this point, you want to have, a minimum of $5 million US. I'm not quite sure what that translates to Canadian dollars, but in assets, charitable assets. And even still, you have to recognize that starting a private family foundation, you're creating an organization, you're creating a nonprofit organization that you have to then manage, or somebody has to. Somebody has to attend to the taxes and the filings and the reporting. It's not insignificant. And so
you need to have regular meetings, those need to be documented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so not everybody has the wherewithal to do that or recognizes that's the reality. But, especially if you have large amounts of money and you're really trying to establish kind of your reputation as a funder and engage in things like policy change, systems change, you want to partner with other people, having a more established foundation, perhaps with staff, can be very advantageous to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. But as you were talking about earlier, the donor advised fund is a very easy way to accomplish a lot of the same things. You're able to set up the donor advised fund either through your wealth advisor or at your local community foundation, or there's all kinds of organizations that do this. You get the tax benefit immediately as soon as you contribute money to your fund. And then, you don't have to make decisions right away, which can be a relief to people, especially if they, it's the end of the year as we're coming upon right now, and they want that tax deduction and benefit, and they want to be charitable. They just don't quite know yet who they want to give to. Or, if you just inherited money because somebody passed away, that could be a very stressful time in your life. You're not ready to make those decisions. And, people, you can get some help with all the back end work. So the donor advised fund sponsor will manage all of the taxes and the reporting and all that stuff and getting the money out the door. You can just tell them where you want the checks to go. But what they're not as good at really is more tailored advising to help the donor think through, well, what cause do I care about? And how do I involve the kids? And is it okay to support policy advocacy, or will I get in trouble? Or, all those kinds of questions. It can be very helpful to have, in addition to your donor advised fund, a trusted advisor to help guide you.
That was going to be my next question, actually, because in the US, there's a lot of charities that get involved in policy and they get involved in advocacy. And I mean, so in Canada as well. But do you find that is it okay? Like, you kind of asked a rhetorical question there. Is it okay if I get involved in policy? And what's your take on that? And what do you see happening and changing over the future in the philanthropic space? Philanthropic.
Like altruism.
Right.
I see, there's a lot of ways that donors can legally, completely above board, get involved in policy advocacy and legislative change. I mean, each country is different in its laws. I mean, here, a nonprofit or a foundation can't support a specific candidate, for example, but you could have an event to raise awareness about issues of how different candidates, are thinking, or have a town hall or a debate or something like that. That's educational. Or you can, raise awareness among legislators about a particular problem in the community and encourage them to create or sign legislation to address that need. And, a lot of times policy is passed, state or federal, but there's no funding behind it, and so there can be ways that funders can support the implementation of new policies or the awareness, community awareness. And so there's a lot of legally feasible ways to do that. It can be helpful to talk to an attorney to make sure you're doing it above board, but there's a lot of associations, in Canada too, that can help funders to figure these kinds of things out.
I want to talk about giving in 2020. Things have changed a lot, and I think non-for-profits are struggling, as much as businesses are, if not more. I don't know the numbers. Maybe, first of all, maybe you know the numbers, how much they're struggling, and second of all, has kind of the landscape changed because of COVID, and because we went through a recession, and the economy is dramatically different, or do you still see the same level of activity in the space you work in?
Yeah, it's really a lot's changed. I mean, giving is increased. I think there's never been more giving in the history of giving than in the past, 9 months, 6 months. In fact, the most recent data I've seen is that there's been 16 billion with a B, billion US dollars raised worldwide in response to COVID. And that isn't even counting everybody. That's really kind of among the largest donors. I think people giving $50,000 and higher. So that's not even counting all the people who are, just donating $100 or $1,000. So there's been a tremendous amount of giving. There's been a huge number of rapid response funds that have been created to support various aspects of COVID. And they exist in Canada, they're in the US, they're all over the world. So these are funds where multiple donors are coming together and pooling their resources. It usually starts with maybe some larger established foundations and a community foundation, maybe a corporation, and they create this fund together. And then others, they encourage anyone to donate to it. And the value of that is, in a crisis, people have a knee-jerk reaction. They want to help immediately to whatever the most immediate need is, which is good. But there's multiple stages to any crisis, whether it's a pandemic or a wildfire or a tsunami, right? There's the immediate response. There's, recovery, longer-term reform, and then building community resilience. And all of that is really important. So a lot of these funds, they're looking at all community needs, not just the most obvious ones. So, it's very typical to respond with, food and shelter, right? Give to the food pantry. But people aren't thinking about, well, what about the longer term mental health needs of this pandemic? What about the domestic violence survivors who are, trapped with their abuser at home because we're all on lockdown? And so, and a value of these funds is you have some smart people thinking about the whole community and how do we make sure all the different kinds of needs are met. And you don't have 1,000 donors like knocking on the door of the food pantry saying, how can I help? Which would literally overwhelm the food pantry. So it's a win-win. It allows people to donate and then the funds to be dispersed quickly and across the community. So that's been really heartening, I think. But the impact on nonprofits has been really hard. I agree with you there.
Yeah, I know for us, like we host the Western Canada's largest outdoor winter 3-on-3 ball hockey festival. It's called Le Classique, and we play boot hockey, and there's hundreds of people that come, and we raise $100,000, and it's a community activity, and it's fun, and then it funds our events for the year and the research that we support and stuff. That's supposed to be in February every year, so it's not going to happen in February this year. I can tell you right now. So we're out $100,000. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing some kind of creative stuff that really caught your eye that's interesting with respect to, like, I used to go to all these cocktail dinners, these rubber chicken dinners as we'd call them, where, you'd pay a couple $100 and the money would go to the Cancer Society or the Symphony or whatever it was. Do you see things changing, and what have you seen that really that's caught your eye that works?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, I've participated in quite a few, galas that were live and then became virtual. And one in particular is the Providence Ballet. So this is Providence, Rhode Island on the East Coast of the US, and a regional ballet company. And a colleague of mine is on the board of directors. So he invited me, and they did a whole weekend of events, of virtual events. But the one I went to was just a half hour, like meet the dancers and learn about the ballet. And so it was a Zoom call, and, it was phenomenal. In a half hour, there were, 30 of us on the call, all had contributed to the ballet. And they invited several of the dancers to come on and the executive director. And, it was a really intimate educational learning experience. And, you could do this in person, like you have a meet the actors or meet the dancers events, in person, but there's always some kind of distance feeling. It's you're in the audience, they're on stage, or, they have set comments they're making, whatever it is. And this was intimate because on a Zoom call, you all have the same 2x2 square, or whatever it is. So there we all were, and they were just kind of sharing their life. The one dancer was sitting in the kitchen talking about the challenge of being tall as a dancer, which I had never thought of. and how strange and hard what has been for her to be in a profession where other people are physically like moving her body around to put her in place, and how like mentally she had to work through that in order to be a dancer. Well, I never thought about that either. And then they showed a clip of one of the dances that they had done. And, it was amazing what they could accomplish with very little money on kind of the fly. And they raised $50,000 that weekend, which is a lot, more than they would have probably raised in the in-person gala. And then I just learned that there's 2 theaters in that town that are still closed. They've reopened, and they had a ballet performance in a parking lot where people like drove up and watched them and, raise money. So I think, it's the organizations that are innovating, that are really seizing this time as an opportunity to change and do things differently and be innovative, that I think are going to succeed.
Kind of like anything else in business, right? Like, I think a lot of us that are running a business, like, I remember when they told us you can't have face-to-face meetings in my business. I mean, that's how we build trust. That's how we get clients. That's how we keep our clients happy. Is we meet them, we shake their hands, we look them in the eye, we tell them, you're going to be okay. The retirement plan's okay, whatever. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be a disaster. How are we going to do this in 2020? Well, we shifted everything virtually, and we started doing stuff like this, and we started reaching out to our clients, prepping videos, creating content, making sure we're communicating with our clients differently. And we were early adopters, and we had success, just like I imagine in other industries as well. The early adopters to virtual training for gyms, workout places, or I think it all. I mean, I know some industries just got hammered and there was no way they could compete, and I totally get that. But I think for those that sought ways to adapt, it's been they were probably the least impacted by COVID, I would imagine, just like the Providence Ballet.
Absolutely, that's absolutely true, and I think and part of it too, though, I think is your own infrastructure and your own, like, the systems and the preparation that you have at any given time. I think when you prepare yourself and you build your own capacity and infrastructure as a business or a nonprofit or a philanthropy, it serves you during a crisis. So, I mean, just a simple example is there are a lot of foundations that had invested in their own technology, before COVID, and were able to issue grant payments electronically, ACH or wire transfers or whatnot. And there are a lot of foundations that never bothered, and they only could write checks, physically write a check, and multiple people had to physically sign the check before it could go to a nonprofit. Well, COVID hit, and a lot of places it was a crime to go to your office. Like, you couldn't get in the building. And so there were a lot of really smart, otherwise sophisticated foundations who were in a state of panic because they desperately wanted to help their nonprofit grantees and respond, and they physically couldn't get their checks. And it seems silly, but to me, that speaks volumes about just, again, it doesn't take a lot of investment, to figure out how to do that, but you just have to do it. You have to believe that you deserve to have the best systems, the most up-to-date technology, the right people, the right advisors around you in order to be effective.
I'm here with Kris Putnam-Walkerly, award-winning author, president of the Putnam Consulting Group. I want to ask you a little bit before we wrap this up about best practices that you would see and that you would say for I guess for anyone, first of all, who chooses to give, and I guess the people you work with as well. Best practices for how to kind of actually impact change, I guess.
Yeah, well, to me, the best practice right now is not to be overwhelmed by all the change that's happening around us, right? There's a lot of funders in the United States who I guarantee you have been in a holding pattern for at least 2 months until the US elections, and then are going to stay in a holding pattern until the next president or whoever is going to be president assumes that position in January. And then they're going to be in a holding pattern waiting and seeing what's going to happen. So they're basically in a 6 to 9 month holding pattern, just waiting around to see what's going to happen, right? But the reality is the world is always changing, right? The conditions are always uncertain. The world is no more uncertain today than it was last year or last decade. And so I think the best practice that I'm advising funders is to really like go ahead and create a plan that you can count on, use it as long as it makes sense, like as long as the conditions make sense, and then change it as conditions change. And really that involves kind of changing your mindset, recalibrating your timeline, not spending an inordinate amount of time on data gathering and research, but really just having the confidence that, you know, the future is uncertain, but this is where we're headed, and we're going to kind of create a game plan and prioritize our time and go for it. And we're going to build time in along the way to check, because we know things are going to change, right? That's obvious. You know, if that's every quarter, every 2 months, every 2 weeks, whatever, and check in on ourselves. Have conditions changed internally in our organization or in the world that would warrant us to change direction? Do we need to abandon anything we were doing that isn't working? Do we need to add something new to make us more successful? And then you have like a sentient, flexible, living, breathing, you know, strategy or approach to your work. And I write about this. I have if your listeners are interested, I just wrote this guide. It's called 8 Things That Every Philanthropist Can Do to Change the World, Even When the World Keeps Changing. And you can go to 8things.org, and it's a free download, and your listeners are welcome to download that. I think it's a really useful guide for nonprofit leaders, for foundation
leaders.
It's
a document or it's a video?
It's a document. It's a PDF.
Okay, it's PDF. www.8things.org, either EIGHT things or the number 8things.org. Sorry, you were saying. So they go there, they download it. It's a free roadmap, I guess. 8
steps to do this, to really kind of recognize that you can change the world, you can make a difference, even when things all around you seem to be changing.
Yeah, things around us are certainly changing, and I think it's about to be a lot more unstable over the next couple of weeks. And I'm not going to ask you for a prediction in the election tomorrow, but I do want to ask you about the causes. Any causes that are dear to your heart specifically?
Yeah, you know, earlier in my career, I was a domestic violence crisis counselor. So I was a volunteer on a domestic violence hotline, and so I think that's a cause that's always been near and dear to my heart. And then I think also, you know, mental health services and substance abuse services are so important and so underfunded. And there's so much stigma around those needs. But my gosh, if everybody had the support that they needed, the world would be in a better place. Our national leadership wouldn't be in a better place. That's really important. And especially during the pandemic, you know, I mean, this is the first wave of, you know, health crises. The next wave is when the reality of the mental health crisis, having gone through all of this, really hits us. I think that's really important. And then, you know, I'm a big believer in community foundations. I've served on the boards of several community foundations, and that's a great way to get involved in your local community and give back.
Great advice. All right. Well, we're running out of time, so I do want to thank you again for stopping by. I believe the website and the Facebook post, I believe we ran it throughout the video here. It's at the bottom, www.8things.org for the free 8 things you could do. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter, please take a sec to subscribe, to like our content. I want to thank you, Kris. Any last things you want to add for our viewers?
I would just add that, you know, I encourage everyone to give and to recognize the importance in creating clarity and impact and joy in your life by being philanthropic.
So much joy. I remember my grandparents had no money whatsoever, grew up on the farm. They were incredibly poor, and they were always out. They were always donating. They were always donating any money that they had, if any. And then they were always donating their time. I vividly remember them knocking on doors, trying to raise $5 at a time for the Cancer Society or whatever it was. And I remember that vividly, that vision of my grandpa and my grandma just going around and knocking on all these doors. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they didn't have money, but they donated their time, and that's how they did it. And then my parents did the same. And now it's in me. It's in my brother. It's in my sister. And we believe that philanthropy is an important part, and you clearly do as well. So I want to thank you for that time. Great words of wisdom on giving. I think that's phenomenal advice. Our viewers, don't miss us. We'll be back here next week, same time, same place, 4 Eastern, 3 Central. We'll be back next week. It'll be a phenomenal guest. Looking forward to the show next week. Monday, November 2nd, 2020. Tomorrow is the election. We'll talk about it next week, probably, maybe not. Who knows? Have a great night, and thanks so much, all of you, for tuning in. And thank you, Kris.
Thank you.